We are recording right now. So first of all, we're obviously talking about the gas situations, and North Carolina gas stations seem to be hit the hardest by this. Do we have too much reliance on the pipeline than other parts of the East Coast? Is it harder to get gas to the mountains? If so, why?
So different regions are experiencing different impacts, and it really has a number of factors contributing to it. Part of it is how reliant you are on the pipeline directly. Part of it has to do with the accessibility for things like trucks. Part of it has to do with how people responded and whether there was a lot of excess demand because people were concerned about gas being available. There are even variations from place to place on how much you store, which affects how often the deliveries happen. So no one factor can point to differences from one area to another. But what I'll say is we know that folks across the region have been concerned. And I think this reminds us about how important even one piece of infrastructure that you never thought about before can be when something goes wrong. It's one of the reasons why we're working so hard to upgrade America's infrastructure. And we're not going to rest until we have the best in the world.
Do you think there needs to be more reserves for individual states in place if something like this happens again? Or
Well, what we really want is a resilient system where if one piece is unavailable, other parts can make up for it. Now, we've tried to some extent to do that even now. For example, my department made it easier to move gas by truck and over water while we've been waiting for the pipeline to get fully back online. But from a long-term strategic perspective, you do want to make sure when possible that you're not too reliant on any one link, because of course that creates a vulnerability. By the way, the same thing is true more generally when we're talking about cybersecurity. Remember, this was a cyber attack on a private company, and it disrupted lives for millions of people. It's a reminder that we really are only as strong as every single part of the system.
is there anything that you guys are looking at as far as the cyber attack goes and getting involved in that and seeing what happened there? Or
I think you're going to see a lot of work to learn lessons from this episode, but right now our focus is just making sure that we can get back to normal, make sure that we're helping the company as they seek to get the gas flowing again, and as I mentioned, using other mechanisms like trucks to get gas to where it needs to be. But I think this is also a wake-up call for the whole country about things like cybersecurity. And it's not just a deep technical issue that you have to be an IT person to care about. Really, all of us can take steps to make sure on everything from passwords we use to knowing a scam or a hack attempt when you see it. Really, we're all going to need to become harder targets for infrastructure because, or harder targets for cyber attacks, I should say, because these threats, unfortunately, are not going away anytime soon.
Unmuting now. We've been dealing with our own issues with Colonial after there was a crack that caused the largest gas leak of its kind in decades. And Colonial said the leak was much bigger than they originally thought. And the latest data from that below the surface reveals that the leak was like 1.2 million gallons of petroleum. People in the area obviously are concerned about this. What do you have to say to them? Was there an oversight and accountability? How can we even trust now that the numbers are accurate?
Well, what I'd say is that any company that's responsible for a piece of infrastructure this important has to meet the highest standards of accountability, of safety. And it's one of the reasons why we have a pipeline safety administration, part of my department called PHMSA, which conducts inspections and regulation as well. We work to make sure there is that kind of accountability after there's been an incident. But what we'd much rather do is make sure there's not an incident in the first place. And that's why we're continuing to emphasize safety and security, getting ahead of any issues before they happen.
We've heard of other issues like this with the pipeline in our area, and the feds got involved. How concerned are you about the infrastructure of the pipeline in general?
Well, again, our role is going to be to make sure there are rigorous inspections and steps both to provide accountability when there have been issues, but most importantly, to prevent issues in the first place. We have a terrific team at the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, and not only the newly appointed leadership coming in with this administration, but career staff who've been there for years or even decades are working together to make sure that this and every one of the 2 million plus miles of pipeline that we oversee are something that everyone in the area can feel confident and safe about.
You're on mute, Megan.
Thanks. I'm muting it because when recording, it like gets the whole newsroom and yeah, anyways. With the hack and the local issues that I just brought up, is there any concern over issues with getting gas to people in a safe and timely manner or any environmental concerns?
We're working to make sure that gas does move efficiently and safely. That has meant some temporary loosening of certain restrictions and flexibility, but that is not to come at the expense of safety. And one of the things we're working with the states on, and with all of the companies that are involved, not just working with Colonial and the pipeline company, but any trucking company, for example, or shipping company involved, is to make sure, even while we're providing some temporary flexibility, that everything is safe and secure and clean.
Is there a plan by the administration to have this not happen again?
So one thing I would point to is the president's cybersecurity executive order, making sure that our own house is in order in terms of federal assets and federal resources. But there is more work to do, both in terms of our policy and frankly, in terms of our society, recognizing the increase in cyber threats. Again, with so much of our infrastructure in private hands, in local hands, that's not a bad thing. But we have to make sure that that is something that can increase, not decrease, the resilience and the safety of our systems and networks. This is no longer a specialty issue. Anybody in a position of responsibility needs to be thinking about cybersecurity, just like we all need to be thinking about health security in a way we probably didn't a year or two ago.
Right. There's a few other questions that we do want to point to. The local rail a few weeks ago, Biden was, he was talking about the train between Atlanta and Charlotte that would take 2 hours to get between the two cities, which is great. How real is that possibility? Who needs to be involved, and how soon could we actually see that happen?
Well, this kind of high quality, high speed rail is a lot easier to do when we have the funding to work with. It's why the president's American Jobs Plan proposes $80 billion for rail in America. Look, the truth is Americans have been asked to settle for less. A citizen in most other developed countries can pretty much assume that they're going to have great, fast, safe rail service. Here in the US, Amtrak's done an incredible job, but has not been given the resources to build out the network we think Americans deserve. And a community like Charlotte is a good example of a place that's really leaned forward in terms of local transportation policy and deserves to have excellent connections throughout the Southeast and throughout the country. You have a fantastic and well-connected airport. We need to make sure that you have the best rail options and surface options as well.
You're on mute.
Yeah. The South Carolina roads, for years, reports have stated that the roads are just some of the worst in the country. And it's great to have big dreams of infrastructure, but if we can't get decent roads, one of the most basic and most used parts of infrastructure, what do you have to say to that? How do we fix this?
Well, there are two things we need to do. One of them, of course, is we just need to make sure that there are resources and dollars for this. Again, it's why the president's American Jobs Plan calls for more than $100 billion for roads and resources in every state in America to be enhanced and improved. But the other thing is our policies. We need to make sure that when we do things like fund road projects, we encourage what we call fix it first and fix it right. In other words, take care of the assets that we have in addition to building new highways. Sometimes the way it's worked in the past, there's been an incentive to kind of do the new shiny project before we've actually repaired or improved what's already there. And we need to make sure that what's already there is not just improved and in good shape, but in a resilient way, meaning that with more extreme weather coming and other issues that are impacting our infrastructure, that we're designing for the next 50 years, not the last 50 years.
Back to the gas, the pipeline, the pipeline came out and said, you got to give us a few days to, the trucks need to get in transportation and everything like that. A lot of people are saying that there is a trucker shortage just because, they're blaming unemployment, they're blaming, a variety of reasons. What is the administration doing in that sort of aspect? Have you guys been hearing a lot of comments about that?
We have been hearing some concerns about this issue, and there are things we can do in the short term and in the long term. In the short term, of course, for the pipeline, we created some temporary flexibility in terms of how trucking works. But for the long term, we need to recruit and train and retain more people to be tank truck drivers, which is the demanding and important job with a lot of responsibility, especially when you think of the safety. So we're monitoring what's going on in terms of just the labor side of this, and also making sure that there are good pathways for training, apprenticeships, and more generally, making sure we have a strong labor force ready to deliver in what's going to be a changing energy sector and industry, really for as long as we're alive, to keep up with those changes, get ahead of them, and use them to make a good income in good paying jobs.
Hey, Megan, I think we're going to have to wrap it there. I think the secretary has to move on.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much. Anything else you'd like to add, or?
I think we're at time, but great speaking with you, and
Yeah,
look forward to
nice.
seeing you again.
Yeah, nice speaking with you too. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.